Hey, what's up guys, it's BenBonk and welcome back to the 28th Slimekeep devlog. In this devlog, I started wrapping up the core game loop and completely reworked the slime capturing system. Also, if you're new here, Slimekeep is a fast-paced roguelike where you must kill and capture slimes to stop the corruption that has infected your land. Without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off, in the last video, I added in a ton of new slime enemies into the game, but I still had a few slimes that I wanted to add. So I started off by adding this plant slime by Sweets into the game. The concept here was that the slime would passively plant seeds in a room. So I got this planting set up, and then I made the seeds actually spawn slimes. Depending on the size of the plant slime, it would plant a different seed, which would either spawn a random difficulty 1, 2, or 3 enemy. So this was a pretty cool and dangerous slime in my opinion. And don't worry, these spawn slimes don't give any slime ball currency, so the player can just infinitely money farm. Next up on the list, we had the beam slime by Equipped Hats. The slime would just move this massive laser beam in a circle, potentially damaging the player. But this initial implementation was a bit too overpowered, so I nerfed him a bit and made his later stages. So now with each next stage, the slime's laser would get longer. Overall, just a pretty neat and powerful slime in my opinion. But moving on, we now had the prototype slime by Alternate Tester. This slime would be quite deadly and would have 2 attacks, a machine gun and a railgun. I started off by making the machine gun, which was pretty simple to make, and now the slime could move around, open up, and unleash a swarm of bullets onto the player. I then made this railgun attack, which isn't quite as deadly, but it would just lock onto the player, and after a second or so, it would damage the player if they didn't move away in time. I then gave the slime a 50-50 chance to choose between these attacks, and made the later stages for the slime, which would have faster and more deadly attacks. Next up, we had the Digger slime by Doormat. This slime would just bury itself underground, dig towards the player, and pop up and slash at the player. In game, I got everything set up, and I really like this kind of trail effect that I ended up making. But then I just made some more animations for other stages of the slime, and set those all up. So yeah, pretty neat slime there. Finally, the last slime that I added for now was the Gladiator slime by Sludger. This slime would just use its sword to aggressively jump towards the player. So I spent some time setting up this really cool sword slash jump animation and got the colliders to move around respectively. After setting up this jump, the slime was starting to feel alive, but I also thought that this jump looked a little clunky. So I tweaked some values and set up other stages of the slime, making the slime jump more quickly with a bigger hitbox. And yeah, that is the Gladiator slime right there, pretty cool stuff. But now I finished adding all the slimes that I wanted to add for the minimum viable product of the game. I had all the difficulty 1 and 2 slimes in place, but now I had 15 more slimes to split amongst the difficulty 3, 4, and 5 categories. So I spent some time organizing all these slimes and ended up with this. Next, I just needed to organize some of the other slimes that I'd already created. I wanted every slime in the game to have only 3 stages, and some of the earlier slimes had 4 to 5, so I just cut off some of these unneeded stages to keep things consistent. And with all these slimes formatted and organized, I spent a bunch of time creating harder difficulty rooms with these newly added more difficult slimes. And after hours of creating rooms, the whole game was sort of playable. Now there's finally difficulty progression and all that jazz, but I still had a ton to refine and tweak. Starting off, I did a ton of playtesting, just fighting through levels to try to find bugs and issues, and bugs and issues did I find. First of all, I noticed this glitch with this annoying little box slime, which would cause my whole entire game to freeze. I fixed this up after an hour or so of investigation, but this was really just the beginning. I gathered this massive list of to-dos that really just kept on growing and got to work. The first thing I really focused on for the game loop was ensuring that the player could easily kill low stage slimes, or slimes that haven't had enough time to grow yet. Because if you somehow don't know, every slime in Slimekeep grows over time, and a core part of the gameplay loop is allowing these slimes to grow to gain more currency, but adding more risk towards the player taking damage. So after some testing and tweaks, I refined the system a bit. I mainly just made it so that slimes would take longer to upgrade to really give the player the choice if they wanted to let slimes grow or not. Essentially, here's a playthrough of the first day or level in the game, with me killing all the slimes as quickly as possible without letting them grow. And as you can see, I ended up with a mere 23 slime balls. Now here's this exact same level, but this time around I decided to let slimes grow as much as possible to maximize my slime ball yield. Now this may have taken a bit longer time-wise, but I ended up with a whopping 54 slime balls, over double from before. However, I did take a combat risk here, leaving me taking a few points of damage. Overall, I think this whole gameplay dynamic is sick, and I really hope it ends up testing the player's decision-making skills, but let me know what you think. But you know what I think? I think you should wishlist Slimekeep on Steam because, well, please? Link in the description if you are emotionally moved by this epic call to action. Moving on, I just had a bunch of random things to fix and implement. First, him and my Discord server made this really cool updated minimap art. This looked awesome, so I decided to add it to the game. But first, I made a few tweaks just to make the minimap fit the game's art style a tad more. Then I set it up in Unity, and boom, things looked way better. But I still wasn't completely done, so I set up this day's tracker clock, and now the player could actually see what level or day they were on, so that's pretty neat. And if you want to potentially help out with the game's development or give feedback on features before they're released in these devlogs, check out my Discord server, link in the description. Another small change I made was making a puddle teleporter spawn after killing a boss to make it so the player doesn't have to backtrack too much, and I also added one in the shop areas. But speaking of bosses, Yedamamade, the legend himself, made this awesome mech boss tile set, which I was meaning to work on for a while now, so I spent some time setting this up, and here's what I ended up with. This was a massive upgrade in my opinion, but hopefully I can make some alternate versions of this room with obstacles in different locations. I also figured that it'd be worthwhile to make a boss entrance or foyer's room to let the player know that they're about to fight a boss. And I made this dripped out skull face with sunglasses as a warning, because I felt like it. I then just spent the next few days patching up a ton of bugs and other small issues. I won't go into the details, but just know that after combining a bunch of systems together, stuff breaks and game development really isn't all sunshine and rainbows and progress all the time. If I had to be honest, all this bug fixing was quite annoying and frustrating to fix up, so I just wanted to put this out there. But if you want to put yourself out there, check out Skillshare, who is sponsoring today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and members across 150 countries. It's a great place to learn all sorts of new skills in a variety of topics. Personally, I decided to check out this course on how to turn a Raspberry Pi into a CCTV system by Jamie Gregg. I've had this Raspberry Pi for a few years now that's just been sitting around gathering dust, so I want to take the opportunity to actually learn how to create something cool with it. This short course showed me some of the basics of the Raspberry Pi and how to turn it into an actual camera. By the end, I created this. I was able to set up the camera and host it on my own local network. It's really cool to see I was finally able to get some use out of this Raspberry Pi and learn a bit about it along the way. So if you have a skill you want to learn, the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So invest in yourself and your personal growth with Skillshare. But anyways, I was looking for some more things to fix, and I kept coming back to the capture system. And this is something that has been bugging me for ages now, so I really just wanted to fix it up once and for all. But little did I know, I was in for quite a messy ride. I started off by creating a system to temporarily make all the slimes in the room that weren't being captured disappear, as previously these other slimes just really got in the way in my opinion and made things feel quite clunky. So here's what this looked like in game, which I think really helped. Next, I experimented with adding this kind of oval to isolate the capture and make the player really focus in on capturing. But I got some feedback from my Discord that this oval didn't look the best, so I tried changing the color to this darker blue, but I don't think this really helped much. But I got the suggestion to make the border be a circle with a yellow outline, and I settled on this, which looked pretty decent to me. Now this was a cool start visually, but I really wanted to make the capture feel more lively and engaging. So after some brainstorming, I thought that it could be cool to force the player to move around the slime while capturing and collect these capture circles. And essentially, instead of just jumping a few times before getting sucked into the gun like before, the slime would jump infinitely until the player moved around and collected enough of these capture circles. With this idea in mind, I got to work. I made it so that now, the player could start capturing these slimes and they would just jump around forever. I also greatly increased the player's movement speed while capturing so they could actually maneuver around the slime. Then I got to work on creating the capture circles. I wrote a bunch of clunky code that sort of worked at the time to get the circles spawning in a random position near the slime. So now the player would have to maneuver around the slime to complete the capture. Now this is cool, but I kept having lots of issues with the capture circles spawning on walls or inside terrain, which was a really big issue. This sounds like an easy fix, but my overlap circle solution just wasn't working for some reason. So I spent countless hours trying to fix this issue, but ended up conceding, and switched the system over to having the capture circles spawn under the slime that the player is capturing. Next, I updated the art for these circles with this little sprite I made in Aseprite, and I was feeling pretty good. So I shared some of these updates to my Discord server and kinda got a bit roasted, but there was some good feedback there, so I set off on fixing some of these issues. First, I made the capture circles smaller, and then created this sort of double jump system for slimes, where slimes could jump multiple times at once depending on difficulty to make them feel a little more alive and panicky. And after sharing these small changes, I got some very good and elaborate feedback from Polar Cube in my Discord server, who pointed out some issues with the system and proposed an alternate system concept. I was pretty lost for a while on what to do, so as me and my Discord server were discussing some alternate ideas for what to do with the capturing system, I started making some small adjustments to the system that I already created as a baseline. First, I wrote the simple line of code to get the slime moving away from the player when capturing, so the player would sort of have to chase after the slime. This is cool, but right now the slime would just move directly away from the player, which didn't feel too good. So I added a bit of randomness to this line of code, so the slime would try to escape the capture and move randomly. And this was a decent start. The randomness wasn't a perfect solution, but it was good enough for now. Getting back on track with what I want to do with this capture system, a lot more discussion was had in my Discord server, and Polar Cube actually coded up this whole entire concept himself for some changes to the capture system, which makes slimes much more panicky and had this bar that would fill up, letting the player know how close they are to capturing a slime. Another cool thing about this concept was how the player wouldn't just instantly fail a capture if they didn't aim the capture gun correctly for 1 second, and instead the capture bar would just tick down and fail the capture if reaching 0, giving the player a bit of leeway. So it's kinda more like Luigi's Mansion or the fishing minigame in Stardew Valley. With some ideas in mind, I got to work creating this kind of bar system. After setting up some basic UI, I made this time to capture variable for all slimes in the game, which I could define in the inspector, so this way more difficult slimes would take longer to capture. The plan was that difficulty 1 slimes would take 2 seconds or so to capture, difficulty 2 slimes would take 3 seconds, and so on. So now in game, I replaced the kind of circle capturing system with this bar instead for now. And I actually think this looked pretty promising. Let's say a slime would take 5 seconds to capture, and in game, the capture bar would just fill up slowly to just this time. But I wasn't done just yet. I worked on the system so that now if the player stops aiming the capture gun correctly, the bar will just tick down instead of just instantly failing, like in Polar Cube's example. But Polar Cube also had another idea for a more methodical capturing system similar to my previous circles idea, where there would be traps where the player would have to drag slimes across these traps to downgrade the slime and eventually capture them, all while avoiding other slimes in the room. It's a little hard to explain right here, but this sounded like a neat idea, so I thought it'd be interesting to combine the panic capturing state with this drag capturing system. I got to work, but again, unfortunately got stuck with traps spawning under or inside of terrain like this. I spent forever trying to figure this simple issue out, and I know it sounds like such an amateur issue, but I'm lost here. Friendship ended with physics2d.overlap circle. So I kind of modified the trap idea a bit and ended up with this. Once the capture bar fills up, a capture circle will spawn at the player's position and the slime would start suctioning towards the player, and the player would have to drag the slime into the circle to complete the suction. In my view, this is just a nice little extra feature on top of the main capturing system to make things feel a little more engaging. But I shared this to my Discord yet again and got lots of mixed feedback. Quite a few people said that the circle dragging system looked way too confusing and unnecessary. I definitely see what they're saying, but let me know what you guys think. Seriously, I read tons of comments and try to actually listen to what you guys think. So if you like the system, let me know, and if you don't, also let me know. But honestly, that's all I ended up with for now. The system isn't finished or anything yet. I still have to make a better slime jumping system with better randomness and actually get capture difficulty scaling with the difficulty of slimes, but I'll get into that in the next devlog. So yeah, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.